In the frozen silence of the Carpathian mountains, a scream tears through the air, and Stefan makes a choice that will destroy everything he thought he knew about survival. The woman he pulls from the wreckage is dying, covered in blood, wearing a dress worth more than his entire village. But it's her final words, whispered with desperate urgency as her eyes lock onto his, that change everything. "Please don't tell anyone you found me." She doesn't know her own name. She doesn't know who she is. And she has no idea that the woman lying dead beside her was the queen of the realm. What Stefan discovers in the days that follow will force him to make an impossible choice. Because this terrified stranger he's sheltering isn't just running from an accident. She's running from an assassination. And the people hunting her believe they've already succeeded. When fragments of memory begin to return, when she realizes the horrifying truth about who died and who survived, she faces a decision that will either save a kingdom or condemn it to destruction. She can remain nobody, invisible and safe. Or she can become someone she's not, step into a dead woman's shoes, and walk straight into the trap that killed the real queen. But here's what neither of them understands yet. The conspiracy that destroyed that carriage reaches all the way to the throne room itself, and the moment she decides to stop running, the moment she chooses to become the queen everyone believes survived, she'll discover that some lies are so dangerous, so absolute, that they stop being lies at all. They become truth. And truth, in a world built on betrayal, is the most dangerous weapon of all. The scream tore through the mountain silence like a blade through flesh, and Stefan's hands froze mid-stroke on the axe. His heart hammered against his ribs, that familiar ice flooding his veins, the same cold that had paralyzed him 4 years ago when he'd heard his daughter's final cry from inside the burning cottage. He couldn't move then. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The axe hit the ground before his mind finished deciding, and his legs were already carrying him through the dense pine forest toward the ravine. Smoke. He could smell it now, acrid and wrong, mixing with the sharp autumn air of the Carpathians. His boots crushed through frost-covered undergrowth, branches clawing at his face. But he didn't slow. Another sound reached him, lower this time, a moan of agony that made his stomach clench. Someone was alive down there. Someone was dying. Stefan burst through the tree line and stopped so abruptly he nearly fell forward. The ravine opened before him like a wound in the earth, and at its base, perhaps 40 feet below, lay the wreckage. A carriage, ornate even in its destruction, had shattered against the rocks. One wheel still spun lazily, creaking in the wind. The horses were gone, probably fled in terror, their traces torn and bloody. But it was the bodies that made his throat close. 2 women lay in the wreckage. One was clearly dead, her neck twisted at an angle that made Stefan look away, his jaw tightening. She wore deep blue velvet, now torn and mud-stained, and even from this distance he could see the richness of the fabric, the gold threading that caught the weak afternoon light. Nobility. Rich enough to travel with guards who were nowhere to be seen now. Rich enough to matter to someone. The second woman was moving. She lay half-buried under splintered wood, one arm stretched toward the dead woman as if reaching, even in unconsciousness, for help that would never come. Her dress was identical, the same deep blue, the same golden embroidery, and Stefan's mind registered this oddly, filing it away, even as his body was already moving. He didn't think. Thinking was what had killed his family. He'd thought about whether the flames were too high, whether he should wait for help, whether he was strong enough. While he thought, they burned. His descent down the ravine was controlled chaos, feet finding purchase on rocks he couldn't see, hands grabbing roots that might give way. Twice he slipped, once nearly falling into a gap between boulders that would have snapped his leg like kindling. But he kept moving, kept breathing, kept pushing the images of 4 years ago back down where they belonged. The woman below made another sound, weaker now, and Stefan's chest constricted. Hold on, just hold on. When he reached the wreckage, the smell hit him fully. Wood smoke and blood and something else. Expensive perfume that seemed obscene in this place of death. He dropped to his knees beside the living woman, his hands hovering over her body. trying to assess without moving her. Her pulse fluttered in her throat like a trapped bird. Blood matted her dark hair, and a gash across her temple still oozed steadily. But it was her arm that made him curse under his breath. Trapped beneath a beam easily 300 pounds, the limb was twisted, possibly broken, definitely crushed. Stefan looked at the beam, then at the woman's face. She was younger than he'd thought, perhaps 30 winters, with features that spoke of privilege, of softness, of a life lived indoors. Her skin was pale even beneath the dirt and blood, her hands uncalloused. What was she doing on this mountain road? Why were two noble women traveling together in identical dresses? Where were the guards who should have died protecting them? Questions for later. The beam had to move now. He positioned himself, planted his feet in the loose scree, and gripped the timber. The wood was rough under his palms, still warm from the fire that had briefly caught and died. Stefan took one breath, then heaved. His shoulders screamed, his back muscles bunched and burned, and for a terrible moment, nothing happened. The beam sat immovable, grinding the woman's arm deeper into the rocks. Then something shifted, wood groaning against stone, and Stefan roared with effort as he lifted, his vision going white at the edges. The beam rose 3 inches. 4. Enough. He couldn't hold it. His muscles were giving out, shaking violently, and he was going to drop it back on her, going to crush her completely, when suddenly the woman's eyes opened. They were gray, he noticed absurdly, gray like winter storms, and they fixed on his face with startling clarity. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the blood rushing in his ears and his own gasping. Breaths. Then, impossibly, she pulled her arm free. Stefan let the beam fall and collapsed beside her, his chest heaving, tasting copper in his mouth. The woman was trying to sit up, her gray eyes now wild with something beyond pain. She was looking past him, looking at the other body, at the dead woman in blue velvet, and her mouth opened in a silent scream that somehow hurt worse than sound. "Don't," Stefan managed, his voice raw. "Don't move. Your arm." But she wasn't listening. She was crawling, dragging herself across the rocks with her good arm, leaving a trail of blood, reaching for the corpse with a desperation that made Stefan's heart twist. He'd seen this before. This refusal to accept death. This animal need to touch the beloved one more time. He'd done the same thing, pulling his wife's charred body from the ruins, holding what remained until the village elders had physically torn him away. The woman reached the corpse and collapsed across it, her shoulders shaking, with sobs that produced no sound. Her fingers touched the dead woman's face with infinite gentleness, tracing features that might have been similar to her own, though death had already begun its work of transformation. Stefan watched, something heavy and familiar settling in his chest. Grief. He knew its weight, knew how it crushed the breath from lungs, knew how it made the world gray and flat and meaningless. Then the woman's head turned, and she looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, and Stefan saw something in them that made his blood run cold. Not just grief, terror. Absolute world-ending terror that had nothing to do with the accident and everything to do with what came next. Her lips formed words again, clearer now, desperate. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't tell anyone you found me." The woman's screams woke Stefan before dawn, tearing him from dreams of fire and ash. He was on his feet before consciousness fully returned, his heart slamming against his ribs, hands reaching for threats that weren't there. In the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the cabin's single window, he could see her thrashing on the cot. Her injured arm clutched against her chest, her face twisted in agony that seemed to go deeper than physical pain. "No," she was sobbing, the word raw and broken. "No, please, I can't remember, I can't." Stefan crossed the room in 3 strides and gripped her good shoulder, firm but careful. "Wake up. You're safe. Wake up." Her eyes flew open, those storm-gray eyes wild and unfocused, and for a terrible moment she looked at him like he was a monster. Then recognition filtered in, followed immediately by something worse. Confusion, deep, terrifying confusion that made her pupils contract and her breathing accelerate into panic. "Where?" she gasped, trying to sit up and falling back with a cry as her broken arm shifted. "Where am I? What happened to—" Her face crumpled. "Oh God. Oh God, she's dead. She's dead and I—" "Breathe," Stefan commanded, the same tone he'd used with spooked horses, with his daughter during thunderstorms. "Slow breaths. In and out. You're in my cabin. You were in an accident. You've been here 3 days. 3 days? Her voice climbed toward hysteria. 3 days and I can't. Her good hand flew to her head, fingers pressing against her temples as if trying to physically hold her thoughts in place. My name. Why can't I remember my name? The question hung in, the cold air between them, and Stefan felt ice settle in his stomach. He'd seen head injuries before, had watched old Gregor the blacksmith forget his own children after a fall from his horse. But this woman's terror went beyond simple memory loss. There was something else in her eyes, something that looked almost like relief mixed with the fear. You remember nothing? He asked carefully, watching her face. I remember. She closed her eyes, and tears leaked from beneath her lids. Blue, fabric, gold thread, her face, the woman in the carriage, but I don't know who she was. I don't know who I am. Her eyes opened again, fixing on him with desperate intensity. You found us together. We were dressed the same. Were we sisters? Please, you have to tell me. Was she my sister? Stefan's mind worked through the implications while his face remained carefully neutral. 2 women, identically dressed, traveling together without visible guards. One dead, one alive and conveniently unable to remember. His instinct, honed by years of surviving in these mountains where trust was currency more valuable than gold, screamed warning. But looking at her now, at the genuine anguish in her face, at the way her fingers trembled against her temples, he found himself uncertain. I don't know, he said finally. The carriage was destroyed. There was nothing to identify either of you. She made a sound like a wounded animal, and her good hand moved from her temple to her chest, pressing flat. Against the simple wool dress Stefan had dressed her in after cutting away her ruined velvet gown. Nothing? No papers, no jewelry, nothing? Your dresses were too damaged. I burned them. The lie came easily, practiced. The truth was, he'd hidden both gowns in the root cellar, along with the golden rings he'd found on both women's fingers, the ornate combs in their hair, the leather pouch containing enough coin to feed his village for a year. Things that rich, things that dangerous. Her face went white, then gray. Burned them. You burned the only... She couldn't finish, her breathing coming in sharp gasps that Stefan recognized. Panic. The kind that made people do stupid things like try to run on broken bones or throw themselves off cliffs because the world had become too much to bear. Listen to me, he said, his voice dropping low, commanding attention through sheer force of will. Whatever you've forgotten, it kept you alive this long. Maybe there's a reason you can't remember. Her eyes snapped to his, suddenly sharp despite the tears. What do you mean? Stefan hesitated, weighing how much to tell her. The truth was, he'd been thinking about this for 3 days, lying awake while she slept drugged on willow bark tea, staring at the expensive fabric of her dress, at the smoothness of her hands, at the way she'd begged him not to tell anyone he'd found her. Rich women didn't beg. They commanded, unless they were running from something worse than death. The accident wasn't natural, he said finally. I went back yesterday to check the site. The carriage axle was cut halfway through, then disguised. Someone wanted it to break on the descent. The color drained from her face so completely Stefan thought she might faint. Her good hand flew to her mouth, and behind it he could see her lips forming wordless denials. Then she was moving, trying to stand, to get away from the cot, from him, from the truth he'd just laid at her feet. Sit down, Stefan ordered, but she wasn't listening, stumbling toward the door on legs that hadn't held weight in 3 days. He caught her before she fell, his arms closing around her shoulders, feeling how she shook like a leaf in winter wind. You'll hurt yourself more. Sit down. Someone tried to kill us, she whispered against his chest, and Stefan felt how the words vibrated through her entire body. Someone cut the axle. Someone wanted us dead. Both of us. Why would anyone? She pulled back suddenly, her gray eyes searching his face with new desperation. You said you don't know who I am, but you're lying, aren't you? You know something. Stefan's jaw tightened. This woman was sharper than her terror suggested, and that made her more dangerous. I know your nobility. I know someone wants you dead. I know you asked me to hide you before you even knew your own name. That's enough to know I should have left you in that ravine. But you didn't. Her voice had changed, grown quieter, more focused. The panic was receding, replaced by something harder. You saved me. You brought me here. You've been caring for me for 3 days. Why? Because I couldn't save them, Stefan thought, his daughter's face flashing behind his eyes. Because I froze once and they burned, and I won't freeze again. But he didn't say that. Instead, he released her and stepped back, putting cold distance between them. Because leaving you would haunt me, he said simply, and I have enough ghosts. She studied him for a long moment, and Stefan had the uncomfortable feeling of being truly seen, perhaps for the first time since the fire. Then she nodded slowly, accepting this truth even if she didn't fully understand it. The other woman, she said quietly. The one who died. You buried her? In the forest, unmarked. He watched her face crumple again, watched grief pour through the cracks in her composure. I'm sorry. I don't even know if she was my sister, my friend, Her voice broke. I don't know if I should be mourning a stranger or mourning family, and I can't remember. I can't. Then mourn them both, Stefan said, his voice rougher than intended. Mourn the woman who died and mourn the woman you were before. Because whoever you were 3 days ago is as dead as the body in that ravine. You understand? If someone wanted you dead badly enough to sabotage a carriage, they'll come looking to confirm. And when they do, they need to find nothing. The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud, and Stefan watched understanding dawn in those gray eyes. Not just understanding, calculation. This woman's mind was working behind her fear, processing implications faster than someone truly helpless should. It made him wonder again what she'd been running from, what she couldn't afford to remember. What do I do? She whispered. Stefan looked at her, at this broken creature with no name and no past and possibly no future, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He'd sworn after the fire that he'd never carry another soul's burden, never let himself care enough to be destroyed again. But here he was, already planning how to hide her, how to protect her, how to keep her alive against threats he didn't understand. You learn to survive, he said, and you pray whoever's looking for you believes you're already dead. The memory returned like a knife between her ribs, sharp and sudden and absolutely devastating. She was kneading bread dough at Stefan's rough-hewn table, her broken arm still splinted but healing enough to manage simple tasks, when her hands froze mid-motion. The texture of the dough, smooth and yielding under her palms, had triggered something deep in her fractured mind, and suddenly she wasn't in the cabin anymore. She was in a grand chamber, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows that painted the floor in jewels of color. Her hands were moving through someone's hair, dark and silken, weaving it into an elaborate braid while a woman's voice, warm and musical, laughed at something she'd said. You always know how to make me smile, Mira. What would I do without you? Mira. Her name was Mira. The knowledge hit her with physical force, and she stumbled backward from the table, her hip crashing into the chair, sending it clattering across the floor. Stefan looked up from the knife he was sharpening, his gray eyes immediately alert, reading danger in her sudden pallor. What is it? He demanded. Already rising, the knife still in his hand. I remember, she gasped, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, higher, tighter. My name. I remember my name. I'm Mira. The second memory crashed over her before she could finish. and this one brought her to her knees. The same grand chamber, but different. Night now, and the woman whose hair she'd been braiding was screaming, not in pain, in fury. They cannot force this. I will not marry that monster, I will not. I don't care what. The council says. And Mira's own voice, younger somehow, desperate. Your Majesty, please, if you refuse, they'll find another way. Your Majesty. The bread dough fell from Mira's nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a wet slap that seemed obscenely loud in the sudden silence. She was on her hands and knees now, her splinted arms screaming protest, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the horror blooming in her chest. She looked up at Stefan through the tangle of her hair, and the words came out broken, disbelieving. She was the queen, Mira whispered. The woman in the carriage. She was Queen Elena, and I was her lady-in-waiting, her companion. I served her for 12 years. 12 years, and I watched her die. And I couldn't. Her voice cracked, splintered into something raw and animal. Oh God, Stefan. She's dead and I'm alive, and that's wrong. That's so wrong. Stefan was beside her in an instant, his hands on her shoulders, grounding her before she could spiral completely into hysteria. But his face had gone hard, his jaw set in a way that made him look dangerous, and when he spoke, his voice was cold enough to cut. The queen, he repeated flatly. You were traveling with the queen of these lands, dressed identically, and you expect me to believe that was coincidence? No, Mira choked out, shaking her head violently. Not coincidence, protection. We always dressed the same when she traveled in case of... The words died in her throat as understanding crashed over her like ice water. Oh God, in case of exactly this. Someone tried to kill her and they succeeded, and everyone will think. She couldn't finish, couldn't force the words past her lips because saying them would make them real, would make the impossible weight of what had happened too enormous to bear. But Stefan's fingers tightened on her shoulders, and his voice, when it came, was inexorable. Everyone will think the queen survived, he said, and you died. You... Cabin seemed to tilt around Mira, the walls pressing in, the air growing thick and impossible to breathe. She tried to stand and couldn't, her legs refusing to support her weight. Stefan's hands were the only things keeping her upright, and she hated him suddenly, hated him for saying it out loud, for making it real. No, she said, but the word had no strength behind it. No, when they find the carriage, when they recover the bodies, they'll know. They'll be able to tell. Will they? Stefan's voice was brutal in its practicality. You said you dressed identically. Same height, same build, same coloring. You told me yourself you don't even know if she was your sister. How similar did you look, Mira? Mira's stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. She'd always known she resembled Queen Elena. That's why she'd been chosen for the position in the first place, plucked from a minor noble family at age 16 and brought to court specifically because her features echoed the queen's, closely enough to serve as deliberate misdirection. In crowds, from a distance, in dim light, they could be mistaken for one another. It was intentional, protective, and now that protection had become a nightmare. The accident destroyed so much, Stefan continued, his voice relentless. The carriage burned, the bodies were damaged. If someone examines them carefully, maybe they'll know. But if someone is just confirming that the queen is dead, he let the implication hang in the air between them. They'll assume the survivor is her, Mira finished, and the words felt like swallowing ground glass. They'll think I'm Elena. They'll think the queen lived and I died, and no one will ever know the truth. Stefan released her shoulders and stood, putting distance between them again, and Mira could see his mind working behind those hard gray eyes. He moved to the window, peering out at the forest beyond with the wariness of a man who'd learned to expect threats from every shadow. You said someone tried to kill her, he said, without turning. Someone cut that axle deliberately. Who? Mira forced herself to think past the panic, to remember. The memories were coming faster now, tumbling over each other in a chaotic flood. Elena's voice, tight with fear. The council wants me to marry King Aldrich. They say it's the only way to prevent war. But Mira, you don't understand. He's a monster. The things I've heard about what he does to—" She'd stopped herself, but Mira had seen the terror in her queen's eyes. "There was a marriage proposal," Mira said slowly, each word dragged up from the wreckage of her memory. "From a neighboring kingdom, King Aldrich of Valdoria. The council wanted Queen Elena to accept. She refused. There were arguments, threats. She was traveling to the mountain monastery to seek counsel from the abbess, someone she trusted. The journey was supposed to be secret. But someone knew, Stefan said, turning to face her. Someone who wanted her dead, rather than risk her changing her mind about the marriage. Or someone who wanted to force the marriage by eliminating her and installing a more compliant heir. She had no heir, Mira whispered. Her husband died 2 years ago, no children. The succession was unclear. If she died, the council would have to choose. Her eyes widened with fresh horror. They'd choose whoever would agree to the marriage. They'd sell the kingdom to Valdoria to avoid war, and everyone would think they were following Elena's wishes because everyone believes she survived. The full weight of the conspiracy settled over them like a burial shroud. Somewhere people were planning, moving pieces into position, believing their queen was dead and their plans secure. And the only person who knew the truth was a lady-in-waiting with no proof, no power, and no way to stop what was coming. Stefan crossed back to her and crouched down, his face level with hers. When he spoke, his voice had lost its coldness, replaced by something that might have been sympathy if it wasn't so heavily laced with grim understanding. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Right now you have a choice that no one else in this kingdom has. You can be Mira, lady-in-waiting, nobody, invisible, safe. Or you can be Queen Elena and step into a trap that's already been set, with enemies you can't identify and power you don't have." "It's not a choice," Mira said, her voice breaking. "How can it be a choice? If I stay silent, if I let them. Think I'm dead, Elena's murderers win. Her kingdom falls to Valdoria. Everything she fought for, everything she died trying to prevent, lives." Stefan interrupted harshly. "Your life, Mira. That's what staying silent costs them. Just your life. And maybe that's a price worth paying to stay breathing." She stared at him, at this hard mountain man who'd saved her for reasons he wouldn't name, and suddenly understood why he lived alone in these woods. He'd made choices too. He'd paid prices. And he'd learned that sometimes surviving meant letting the world burn while you watched from a safe distance. But Mira had spent 12 years watching Elena fight for her people, watching her queen carry impossible burdens with grace and strength. She'd held Elena's hand through her husband's death, had witnessed her grief transform into fierce determination to rule well in his memory. And she'd been there in those final moments in the carriage, had heard Elena's last words even though she hadn't remembered them until now. "Promise me," Elena had gasped, her hand clutching Mira's with desperate strength, even as blood poured from the wound in her side. "Promise me you'll stop them. Promise me." The memory cut off there, lost in the chaos of the crash, but Mira knew with absolute certainty what Elena had been asking. Not to be saved, to be avenged, to have her death mean something. "I can't," Mira said, meeting Stefan's eyes. "I can't let her die for nothing, even if it costs me everything, even if I have to—" She stopped, the impossible thought forming before she could stop it. "Even if I have to become her." Stefan's face went perfectly still, and for a long moment he just stared at her. Then, slowly, deliberately, he shook his head. "You don't know what you're saying. You can't just put on a crown and pretend." "Why not?" The words came out fierce, desperate, edged with something that might have been madness. "Everyone already thinks I'm her. If I went back now, if I claimed to be Elena, who would question it? Who would dare?" "Everyone," Stefan said flatly. "The moment you opened your mouth, the moment you didn't know something only the queen would know, you'd be exposed in hours, and then you'd die for real. probably in ways that would make that carriage accident look merciful. He was right. Mira knew he was right. But the alternative was watching Elena's kingdom fall, watching her queen's murder succeed, watching everything burn because she'd been too afraid to try. "Then teach me," she whispered. "Help me learn what I need to know. I served her for 12 years, Stefan. I know her mannerisms, her speech patterns, her..." A sound from outside cut her off mid-sentence. Voices. Horses. The jingle of metal that could only be armor. Stefan's hand went to the knife on his belt in one smooth motion, and his eyes locked on hers with terrible intensity. "Too late for choices," he breathed. "Someone's here." Stefan's hand closed around Mira's wrist with bruising force, dragging her away from the window before she could move closer to see who approached. His eyes had gone cold, calculating, the eyes of a predator assessing threats, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The root cellar. Now. But if they're searching for survivors, if they're here to help, then why are they being quiet?" Stefan hissed, and Mira's heart stuttered as she realized he was right. No calls of greeting, no announcement of purpose. Just the careful, deliberate sound of horses being walked rather than ridden, of men moving with tactical precision rather than the casual approach of travelers seeking shelter. Stefan pulled up the worn rug in the corner, revealing a trapdoor Mira had never noticed. He hauled it open with one hand, the other still gripping her wrist, and gestured urgently downward into darkness that smelled of earth and old vegetables. "Get in. Don't make a sound. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What about you?" Mira's voice came out higher than intended, fear making it crack. "I'm a widower who lives alone and minds his own business," Stefan said, already lowering her toward the opening. "I have nothing to hide. You, on the other hand, are a dead woman who might be a queen. Get in." Mira's feet found the ladder rungs just as a heavy fist pounded on the cabin door. 3 sharp raps, military in their precision, and a voice called out with false joviality that made her skin crawl. "Ho there. Mountain man, we seek shelter and information. Open in the name of the Queen's Guard." The Queen's Guard. Mira's whole body went rigid on the ladder, her mind racing. These were Elena's own soldiers, sworn to protect her, to serve her. If she revealed herself now, if she climbed out and declared who she was, or rather, who everyone thought she was, they would escort her back to the capital, back to safety. Except Elena was dead. And these men, wearing the Queen's colors and speaking with the Queen's authority, had arrived within days of an assassination that should have killed them both. The coincidence was too perfect, too clean. Stefan's boot pressed against her good hand on the ladder rung, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to communicate absolute command. "Stay. Down." Then the trapdoor was closing above her head, the rug being kicked back into place, and she was alone in the darkness with her hammering heart and the terrible certainty that everything was about to go wrong. Above her, she heard Stefan's footsteps crossing to the door, heard the scrape of the bolt being drawn back. His voice, when he spoke, was perfectly neutral, perfectly unremarkable. "Queen's Guard, you say? We don't see much of your kind up here. What brings you to my door?" "We seek information about an accident." This was a different voice, smoother, educated, carrying the weight of command. "A royal carriage went off the road 3 days past, perhaps 5 miles south of here. We're searching for survivors or witnesses." Mira's breath caught. 5 miles. They knew exactly where the accident had occurred, knew exactly when. This wasn't a search party stumbling blind through the mountains. This was confirmation. They'd come to verify their work. "Can't help you there," Stefan said, and Mira could hear him moving, probably stepping back to let them inside. The thought made her stomach clench. "I keep to myself, don't travel the South Road much. Too many bandits." "Indeed." The educated voice was closer now, just above her head. Mira pressed herself against the earthen wall, trying to make herself smaller, trying not to breathe. "And yet, we're told you're a hunter. Surely you range widely through these mountains." "For game, yes, not for politics." Stefan's voice had taken on an edge. "What's this about, Captain?" If there was an accident, shouldn't you be searching the ravines, not bothering honest folk? A pause, long enough that Mira's lungs began to burn from holding her. Breath. Then, we found the carriage and the bodies. What we didn't find was any indication of who they were or where they came from. Curious, don't you think? A noble carriage, expensive horses, but no identification, no papers, no surviving guards. Bandits, Stefan suggested, his tone casual, but Mira could hear the tension beneath it. Probably stripped anything valuable before the carriage went over. Perhaps. The captain's footsteps creaked across the floorboards, and Mira tracked his movement by sound alone. He was circling, examining the cabin, looking for something. Tell me, have you noticed any strangers in the area? Anyone seeking shelter, perhaps injured? Just you lot. Another pause. Longer this time. Mira's injured arm was beginning to throb from the awkward position, and she shifted minutely, trying to find relief. The movement made the smallest sound, just the whisper of fabric against earth, but in the tense silence it seemed to echo like thunder. The footsteps above her stopped. What was that? The captain's voice had lost its false friendliness, gone sharp and predatory. Rats, Stefan said immediately. Root cellars full of them this time of year. That's what happens when you live alone, Captain. Things get out of hand. I see. The footsteps resumed, but they were moving with purpose now, heading directly toward the corner where the trapdoor lay hidden beneath the rug. You won't mind if we have a look then? Part of our search, you understand. We must be thorough. Mira's heart stopped. Through the cracks in the floorboards above her head, she could see slivers of lamplight, movement, the dark shape of boots stopping directly over the trapdoor. Her mind raced frantically. If they opened it, if they found her, what would they see? A woman matching the dead queen's description, hiding in a cellar while soldiers searched for survivors. They would know. They would know everything. Of course, Stefan was saying, his voice carefully controlled. But I should warn you, I haven't cleaned down there in months. Smells pretty rank. Might want to prepare yourselves. We're soldiers, mountain man. We've smelled worse. The captain's voice was right above her now, and Mira heard the scrape of the rug being pulled back, the groan of wood as fingers found the trapdoor's edge. Now then, let's see what you're hiding. The crash was explosive, sudden, the sound of pottery shattering against stone. Mira flinched hard, her head cracking against the earthen wall, stars bursting across her vision. Above her, chaos erupted, shouting, the ring of steel being drawn, Stefan's voice raised in what sounded like genuine shock. God's blood, I'm sorry. My elbow caught the shelf, I didn't mean... Your sword, Captain, there's no need for... Stand back. The captain's voice was tight with fury and something else. Fear. Men, secure him. This bastard's hiding something, I can feel it. I'm not hiding anything. Check the damn cellar. If you want, but get your hands off me. The sounds of a struggle, grunts of effort, and then a meaty thud that made Mira bite her lip hard enough to draw blood to keep from crying out. They were beating him. They were beating Stefan because of her, because he'd hidden her, because she'd made that tiny sound that had given away her presence. Last chance, mountain man. The captain's voice was cold now, professional. We know someone survived that crash. We know they came this direction. And we know that anyone who helped them is guilty of treason against the crown. So I'll ask you once more, and only once. Have you seen anyone from that carriage? The silence stretched so long Mira thought she might scream. Then Stefan's voice came, rougher now, probably speaking through a split lip. Go to hell. Another impact, harder this time. Mira heard Stefan's grunt of pain, heard his body hit the floor, and something inside her snapped. She couldn't do this, couldn't cower in the darkness, while a man who'd saved her life was brutalized for the crime of showing her mercy. Her hand went to the ladder, ready to climb up, ready to reveal herself and end this, when Stefan's voice rang out again, stronger this time, carrying clearly through the floorboards. Wait, yes, there was someone. A man injured came through 2 days ago, heading east toward the border. I gave him food and sent him on his way. That's all I know, I swear it. Mira froze. her hand gripping the ladder rung. So hard it hurt. A man. East. Stefan was lying, sending them in exactly the wrong direction, and he was doing it knowing what it would cost if they discovered the truth. Describe him. The captain's voice was skeptical but interested. Tall, dark hair, maybe 30 winters. Had a gash on his head, was bleeding pretty bad. Spoke with a southern accent, wouldn't give his name. That's everything, I swear on my dead wife's grave. Another long silence. Mira held her breath, waiting for the trap door to open, waiting for discovery and death. But then the captain spoke again, and his voice was moving away, back toward the door. If you're lying to me, mountain man, I'll come back and burn this cabin to the ground with you in it. Understand? Understood. Search the area, the captain ordered his men. Fan out east. If there's an injured man heading for the border, we'll find him before nightfall. And you... His voice hardened, directed at Stefan again. You stay right here. We'll be back to verify your story. If it doesn't check out, you'll wish you'd told us the truth. The door slammed. Hoofbeats receded into the distance, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely into the mountain silence. Mira counted to 100, then 200, her whole body shaking with reaction, before she finally heard Stefan's voice, barely above a whisper. They're gone, but don't come up yet. She waited, every muscle locked tight, until she heard him moving around above, heard the scrape of furniture being repositioned, the sound of water being poured. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the trap door opened and Stefan's face appeared, illuminated by lamplight. His face was a ruin. One eye was already swelling shut, blood leaked from his nose and a split in his lip, and when he reached down to help her up, she could see his knuckles were torn and bleeding. Oh God, Mira breathed as she climbed out, her good hand reaching toward his face before she could stop herself. Stefan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. If I hadn't made that sound. Doesn't matter. His voice was flat, distant, and he pulled away from her touch. They would have searched anyway. They were looking for confirmation, not survivors. Which means they know someone lived through that crash, and they won't stop until they find out who. The implications crashed over Mira like ice water. They'll be watching. Every road, every village, every way out of these mountains. Yes. Stefan moved to the window, peering out at the darkening forest beyond. And when their search east turns up nothing, they'll be back. We have maybe 2 days before they realize I lied. Maybe less. Then I have to leave. Tonight. I'll go west, away from them, find somewhere to hide until... Until what? Stefan turned to face her, and his undamaged eye was hard as stone. Until they give up? They won't. Until you remember enough to prove who you are? Even if you could, who would you tell? The Queensguard just proved they're part of this conspiracy, Mira. Elena's own soldiers are hunting you. The truth of it settled over her like a burial shroud. She was alone, hunted, with no allies and no proof of anything except that she was supposed to be dead. Then what do I do? She whispered. Stefan stared at her for a long moment. Something working behind his damaged face. Some calculation being made. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but absolutely certain. You do what you said. Before. You become her. The transformation began at dawn, and it started with pain. Stefan had spent the night extracting everything Mira could remember about Queen Elena. Every gesture, every habit, every tiny detail that might mean the difference between a convincing performance and immediate execution. Now, as gray light filtered through the cabin's single window, he stood before her with the Queen's salvaged dress in his hands, and his face was grim. Put it on, he said, holding out the blue velvet gown he'd retrieved from the root cellar. The fabric was torn, stained with mud and blood, but the golden embroidery still caught the light, still screamed wealth and power in a way that made Mira's stomach turn. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, her fingers brushing the fabric that Elena had worn in her final moments. The texture triggered a cascade of memories, overwhelming and immediate. Elena laughing as Mira laced her into this very dress the morning they'd left the palace. Elena's voice, tight with determination. If I'm going to defy the council, I need to look like a queen doing it. I can't, Mira whispered, pulling her hand back as if the dress had burned her. Stefan, I can't wear her. It feels like desecration, like I'm robbing her grave. Stefan's undamaged eye fixed on her with an intensity that was almost physical. His face was worse this morning, purple and swollen, a living testament to what he'd already sacrificed for her survival. When he spoke, his voice was hard enough to cut stone. That's exactly what you're doing. You're robbing her grave, stealing her identity, wearing her skin like a costume. And you need to make peace with that right now, because the moment you walk out of this cabin claiming to be Queen Elena, every single thing you do will be a lie built on her corpse. He thrust the dress toward her again. So put it on, or take it off forever and stay Mira. But decide now, because we're out of time for doubt. The brutality of his words hit Mira like a slap, stealing her breath. But beneath the shock, she felt something else. Clarity. Stefan wasn't trying to comfort her or ease her conscience. He was forcing her to confront exactly what she was choosing, to feel the full weight of it before it crushed her later. She took the dress. The fabric was cold against her skin as she changed, and every inch of it felt wrong, felt like betrayal. But as Stefan helped her lace the back, his fingers surprisingly deft. Despite his injuries, Mira forced herself to breathe through the guilt. Elena had died trying to save her kingdom. If Mira could use her death to finish that mission, wasn't that what her queen would have wanted? Now the hard part, Stefan said, stepping back to examine her. His expression was unreadable. You look like her. Same height, same build, same features. Close enough that no one who didn't know her intimately would question it. But the moment you speak, the moment you move, people will know. Queens don't walk like ladies in waiting, Mira. They don't hold themselves the same way. I know, Mira said, and was surprised by how steady her voice came out. I watched her for 12 years. I know how she moved. Then show me. Stefan crossed his arms, wincing slightly at the movement. Walk across the room like you're entering a throne room, like you expect every person there to bow. Mira took a breath and started forward, letting her spine straighten, her chin lift, her shoulders pull back in the way she'd seen Elena do 1,000 times. 3 steps in, Stefan's voice cracked out like a whip. Stop. You're performing. You're showing me what you think a queen looks like, but you don't believe it. Your hands are nervous, your eyes keep dropping to the floor, and your left foot turns in slightly when you're uncertain. Do it again. She tried again, and again, and again. Each time, Stefan found something wrong, some tiny detail that betrayed her, some gesture that marked her as a pretender. After the 8th attempt, Mira's frustration boiled over. I can't do this, she snapped, her voice rising. I'm not her, Stefan. I can't just become her by walking differently or holding my head higher. She was born to this, raised for it. She had 28 years of training and breeding and she's dead, Stefan interrupted, his voice cutting through her panic like ice water. She's dead, and you're alive, and right now you're the only person in this kingdom who knows the truth about what happened on that mountain road. So you can either figure out how to convince people you're her, or you can watch her murderers win while you hide in my cabin and wait for them to find you. The words hit like hammer blows, each one driving home the impossible reality of her situation. Mira's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall, her throat tight with grief and terror, and a rage so profound it felt like it might consume her from the inside out. I don't know if I'm strong enough, she whispered. Stefan moved closer, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its harsh edge, replaced by something that might have been understanding. Neither do I. But here's what I do know. You spent 12 years watching her, learning her, becoming enough like her that they dressed you identically to protect her life. That means somewhere inside you is everything you need to be her. You just have to stop being afraid of it. And if I fail, if someone sees and through me, then we both die. Probably badly. Stefan's expression didn't change, but Mira saw something flicker in his good eye. Acceptance, maybe, or resignation. But we're already dead if you don't try. Those soldiers will be back in 2 days, and when they find this cabin empty, they'll tear these mountains apart looking for us. Our only chance is to walk straight into the lion's den before they realize their prey escaped. The audacity of the plan was staggering. Return to the capital. Claim to be the queen who'd barely survived an assassination attempt, identify the conspirators before they could act again, and somehow survive long enough to expose the truth. It was madness. It was suicide. It was the only option they had. "Teach me," Mira said, and was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Teach me everything. I need to know how to move, how to speak, how to command. I need to become someone people will die for rather than question." Something shifted in Stefan's expression, a glimmer of what might have been respect. "Then we start with the hardest lesson. Queens don't ask for things, Mira. They expect them. They don't hope people will obey. They know people will obey, because questioning them isn't even a possibility in anyone's mind. That's arrogance. No, that's certainty, and it's the difference between a woman wearing a crown and a queen." Stefan moved to the cabin's only chair and sat, deliberately casual, then looked up at her with cool appraisal. "Now, command me to stand." Mira opened her mouth, then closed it again. "How did you command someone? Just order them. Use a certain tone." She'd heard Elena give commands countless times, but actually doing it felt impossible. "Stand up." She tried, and even to her own ears it sounded weak, uncertain. Stefan didn't move. "Why would I? You sound like you're asking permission, like you're hoping I'll obey but accepting that I might not." "A queen doesn't hope, Mira. Try again." "Stand." Up. Firmer this time, but still wrong. Still too much question in it. Again. "Stand up." Again. "Stand." Mira stopped, frustration burning in her chest. This was ridiculous. She couldn't just magically develop the kind of presence Elena had been born with, couldn't just manufacture authority out of thin air. She opened her mouth to say exactly that, but something else came out instead. "Stand." One word. Flat. Absolute. No question, no hope, no uncertainty. Just expectation so complete it didn't occur to her that he might refuse. Stefan stood immediately, and the look on his battered face was triumph. "There, that's it. That's what you need to find every single time you speak. Not arrogance, not performance. Just absolute certainty that you will be obeyed because anything else is unthinkable." Mira stared at him, her heart hammering. For just a moment, when she'd spoken that command, something had shifted inside her. Some part of her that had watched Elena for 12 years had stepped forward, had inhabited her skin, and it had felt terrifyingly natural. "Again," Stefan said, sitting back down. "Make me kneel." The training continued through the morning and into the afternoon, Stefan pushing her relentlessly, finding every crack in her performance and forcing her to seal it. He made her practice commands, practice walking, practice the particular way Elena held her hands when she was thinking versus when she was angry. He made her recite everything she knew about court politics, about Elena's relationships with various nobles, about the queen's daily routines and preferences. And slowly, gradually, Mira felt herself changing. Not becoming Elena exactly, but becoming something else. Someone who could wear Elena's face and voice and authority without completely shattering under the weight of it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Stefan finally called a halt. He studied her in silence for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then nodded slowly. "It might work," he said quietly. "If we're lucky, if you don't panic, if no one looks too closely, it might actually work. And if it doesn't?" Stefan's jaw tightened. "Then I'll make sure you die quickly. It's the last mercy I can offer." The words should have terrified her, but instead, Mira felt something like gratitude wash through her. Stefan understood what she was walking into, understood the stakes, and he was offering her the only kindness left if everything went wrong. A quick death instead of whatever the conspirators would do to a failed imposter. "Thank you," she said softly. Stefan turned away, moving to the window to check the darkening forest beyond. When he spoke again, His voice was rough. "We leave before dawn. There's a merchant caravan that passes through the valley 2 days from here, heading to the capital. If we can reach them, if you can convince the merchant to give you passage, we might make it to the city without the guard intercepting us. And once we're there, then you walk into the palace, claim to be the queen returned from the dead, and pray that whoever tried to kill you doesn't succeed before you can expose them." He glanced back at her, and in the failing light his damaged face looked almost demonic. Simple, really. The absurdity of calling any of this simple might have made Mira laugh under other circumstances. But as she stood in Elena's blood-stained dress, feeling the weight of a dead queen's identity settling onto her shoulders like a shroud, she found she couldn't manage even a smile. "Stefan," she said quietly, "why are you doing this? Really? You could have left me in that ravine. You could have turned me over to the guard. You could walk away right now and save yourself. So why?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, finally, without turning from the window, "Because I couldn't save them. My wife, my daughter. They burned while I stood outside and did nothing. And I've lived with that for 4 years. Maybe I can't change that, but I can make sure I don't stand by and do nothing ever again." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Even if it kills me." Mira's throat closed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Not for herself, not even for Elena, but for this broken man who'd lost everything and was still somehow finding the strength to fight for someone else's justice. "We're going to survive this," she said, and was startled by how much she meant it. "Both of us. We're going to survive, and we're going to make them pay for what they did." Stefan finally turned to face her, and in his good eye she saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope. Fragile and desperate, but real. "Then get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow you stop being Mira. Tomorrow you become a queen." The merchant caravan's lead wagon creaked to a halt when Mira stepped into the road, and for one terrible moment she thought her legs would give out beneath her. The morning sun caught the golden embroidery on her dress, making it shine like flame, and she felt every eye in the caravan fix on her with the weight of judgment. 23 people. She'd counted them as they approached. 23 witnesses who would either accept her performance or condemn her to death. "Your Majesty?" The merchant's voice cracked with shock as he scrambled down from his seat, nearly falling in his haste. He was perhaps 50 winters, weathered and practical, the kind of man who'd seen enough of the world to recognize genuine nobility when he saw it, or thought he saw it. "Merciful God, is it truly you? We heard, the report said I was dead." Mira's voice came out steady, commanding, and she felt Stefan's presence behind her like an anchor. They'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in the 2 days of hiking to reach this road, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. The reports were premature. The merchant dropped to his knees so fast Mira heard his joints crack. Around the caravan, others followed suit, a cascade of bodies hitting the dirt road in obeisance. Some looked stunned, others confused, and 3, Mira noticed with ice forming in her stomach, looked terrified rather than relieved. 3 men near the back of the caravan whose faces had gone white as bone, whose hands had moved instinctively toward weapons before they caught themselves. Conspirators, or at least men who knew something they shouldn't. "Rise," Mira commanded, letting her gaze sweep over the kneeling crowd without lingering on the 3 terrified men. "Not yet. I require passage to the capital, immediately. My escort was killed in an ambush, and I've been sheltering in the mountains while I recovered from my injuries." She gestured toward Stefan without looking at him. "This man saved my life. He will be appropriately rewarded." The merchant was babbling now, promises and assurances tumbling over each other. "Of course, Your Majesty, of course, my finest wagon, my personal guard, whatever you need. But your injuries, should we send for a physician? The nearest village has—" "No." The word came out sharp enough to make him flinch. "No physicians, no delays. Every moment I remain away from the capital, my enemies grow bolder. We leave within the hour." As the merchant scrambled to organize the caravan for departure, Mira allowed herself to be helped into the largest wagon, Stefan following close behind. The moment the canvas flap closed behind them, cutting them off from outside eyes, she felt her carefully maintained composure crack. Her hands were shaking violently, and she had to clench them into fists to make them stop. "The 3 men in the back," she whispered urgently. "Did you see their faces?" Stefan nodded, his expression grim. "Saw them. Recognized one of them too. Marcus Thorne. Minor noble, 3rd son, no inheritance. Disappeared from court about 6 months ago. Word was he'd gone into private security. Private security for who? But Mira already knew the answer. She'd seen it in Marcus's eyes when he'd looked at her. That moment of pure terror when he'd realized the queen he'd helped kill was standing in front of him, very much alive. For whoever paid him to make sure you died on that mountain? Stefan moved to the wagon's small window, peering through the gap in the canvas. They'll try something. Maybe not here, too many witnesses, but somewhere between here and the capital. They'll make their move. Mira's mind raced, weighing options. She could expose them now, call them out in front of the caravan, demand answers. But if she was wrong, if they were innocent men whose fear came from something else, she would reveal her own uncertainty, would show everyone that she wasn't entirely sure of anything, least of all her own identity. "Let them try," she said finally, and was surprised by the coldness in her own voice. "Let them come for me, because when they do, we'll finally have proof of who's behind this." The wagon lurched into motion, and Mira settled back against the cushions the merchant had frantically provided. The next 2 hours passed in tense silence, Stefan watching the road behind them while Mira tried to prepare herself for what came next. Every scenario she imagined ended in blood and screaming, but she forced herself to think through them anyway. If Marcus and his companions attacked openly, what would she do? If they tried poison? If they waited until nightfall? The attack, when it came, was both expected and completely shocking in its audacity. They'd stopped for a midday meal at a clearing beside a stream, the merchant insisting that Her Majesty needed rest and refreshment. Mira had agreed, partly because refusing would seem suspicious, partly because she needed time to think. The clearing was peaceful, almost idyllic, with afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees and the sound of running water creating a false sense of safety. She was standing at the stream's edge, Stefan beside her, when she heard the first scream. Mira spun around to see chaos erupting in the camp. Marcus and his 2 companions had drawn weapons, were moving through the caravan with brutal efficiency, cutting down anyone who tried to intervene. But they weren't killing randomly. They were creating panic, driving people away from the clearing, away from witnesses, creating an arena. "Your Majesty!" Marcus's voice rang out across the clearing, and Mira felt ice flood her veins at the mockery in his tone. "Or should I say, whoever you really are? Did you think we wouldn't notice? Did you think we wouldn't question why the queen we killed is suddenly walking and talking?" The words hit like physical blows, and Mira saw understanding dawn on the merchant's face, saw other members of the caravan beginning to look at her with doubt rather than reverence. This was it. This was the moment that would either prove her or destroy her. "You admit to regicide?" Mira's voice came out cold, commanding, and she forced herself to step forward rather than back. Queens didn't retreat. "You stand before me and confess to attempting to murder your sovereign?" "I stand before a fraud." Marcus was advancing now, his sword drawn, his companions flanking him. "The queen died in that carriage. We made sure of it. Which means you're either a ghost, or you're someone very foolish pretending to be her." Stefan had moved to intercept, but Mira caught his arm, stopping him. This wasn't a fight that could be won with swords. This was a battle of certainty, of belief, and she had to win it herself, or lose everything. "You made sure of it." Mira let each word fall like a stone, heavy with implication. "Tell me, Marcus Thorne, 3rd son of House Thorne, who paid you to sabotage my carriage? Who hired you to commit treason?" Marcus hesitated, just for a moment, and Mira saw the first crack in his certainty. She knew his name, knew his family. How could she know that if she wasn't who she claimed to be? "It doesn't matter who paid me. Marcus said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. What matters is that you're not her. You can't be her. We watched that carriage go over, watched it burn. No one could have survived that. And yet, here I stand. Mira took another step forward, and this time Marcus took a step back. The shift in dynamics was subtle but unmistakable. Here I stand, knowing your name, knowing your treason, knowing that you and your accomplices are about to die for what you've done. The only question is whether you'll tell me who hired you before I have you executed, or whether you'll take that secret to your grave. The clearing had gone silent except for the sound of the stream and the harsh breathing of frightened people. Mira could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. If Marcus attacked now, if he called her bluff, everything would collapse. But if he hesitated, if his doubt grew large enough, kneel. The word came out of her like a thunderclap, absolute and undeniable. Kneel before your queen and beg for a mercy you don't deserve. Marcus's sword wavered. His eyes darted to his companions, looking for support, for confirmation, but they were staring at Mira with something like awe and terror mixed together. Because she wasn't acting like a fraud trying to maintain a lie. She was acting like a woman who knew, beyond any doubt, that she was exactly who she claimed to be. I said kneel. Mira's voice cracked like a whip, and she saw Marcus flinch. Or do you dare to raise your sword against me a second time? Do you want to add attempted regicide to your list of crimes? The sword fell from Marcus's hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud that seemed to echo in the silence. His knees followed, buckling beneath him, and his companions did the same. Not because they believed, necessarily, but because in that moment, the cost of being wrong was too high, the weight of her certainty too overwhelming to resist. Mercy, Marcus whispered, his face ashen. Your Majesty, please. We were following orders. We never wanted. Whose orders? Mira moved closer, looming over him, and felt Stefan's solid presence at her back. Speak quickly, Marcus, because my patience is as dead as you wished me to be. Lord Chancellor Aldwin. The name burst from Marcus's lips like a confession torn from his soul. He said you were a threat to the kingdom. Said, your refusal to marry King Aldrich would bring war. He paid us to make it look like an accident, said it was for the good of the realm. The name hit Mira like a fist to the stomach. Lord Chancellor Aldwin, Elena's own chief advisor, the man who'd served her for 6 years, who'd counseled her through her husband's death, who'd stood at her right hand through every crisis. The betrayal was so enormous, so absolute, that for a moment Mira couldn't breathe. But she couldn't show that. Couldn't show any weakness, any shock. Queens didn't falter when they discovered treason. Lord Aldwin. Mira's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. And who else? Who else was party to this conspiracy? I don't know. Marcus was sobbing now, his forehead pressed to the ground. He worked through intermediaries, kept everything compartmentalized. We were just hired swords, Your Majesty. We didn't know the full plan. Mira looked at Stefan, saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. This was bigger than they'd imagined. If the Lord Chancellor himself was involved, if he had the resources to hire assassins and sabotage royal carriages, then walking into the capital would be walking into a trap she might not escape. But what choice did they have? If she ran now, if she failed to return, Aldwin would install his own puppet on the throne. Would marry that puppet to King Aldrich. Would sell Elena's kingdom piece by piece to the highest bidder. Bind them, Mira commanded, and the merchant's guards scrambled to obey, eager to prove their loyalty after their earlier paralysis. They'll return to the capital in chains. They'll testify before the full court about the Lord Chancellor's treason, and then they'll hang. As Marcus and his companions were dragged away, still pleading for mercy they wouldn't receive, the merchant approached Mira with reverence that looked genuine now. Whatever doubts he'd harbored had been burned away by the force of her performance. Your Majesty, he said, quietly, if what he says is true, if the Lord Chancellor wants you dead, then returning to the capital is suicide. He controls the city guard, the palace staff, half the noble houses. You'd be walking straight into his hands." "I know." Mira turned to look at the road ahead, at the path that led to the capital and Elena's palace, and a confrontation she might not survive. "But I'm walking in anyway, because if I don't, if I let fear stop me, then everyone who died in that carriage died for all." "Nothing." Stefan moved up beside her, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. "You're not Elena. You don't owe her this." "No," Mira agreed, still staring at the road ahead. "But I owe it to myself. Because if I run now, if I let them win, then I really am just a fraud, wearing a dead woman's face. And I need to be more than that. I need to matter." The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, as the caravan resumed its journey toward the capital, toward judgment, toward a throne room where Mira would either prove herself or die trying. And in the wagon behind her, bound and gagged but still alive, Marcus Thorne stared at her back with eyes full of a terror that went beyond fear of execution. Because he'd looked into her eyes when she'd commanded him to kneel, and he'd seen something that shook him to his core. He'd seen a queen. The throne room doors opened with a sound like thunder, and Mira felt every eye in the assembled court turned toward her with the weight of absolute judgment. 200 nobles, advisors, guards, and courtiers stood in perfect silence, their faces frozen in expressions ranging from shock to terror to something that might have been hope. At the far end of the hall, seated in Elena's chair with an ease that made Mira's blood boil, Lord Chancellor Aldwin rose slowly to his feet. He was exactly as Mira remembered him. Tall, silver-haired, distinguished, with the kind of face that inspired trust through sheer force of dignified composure. For 6 years he'd stood at Elena's right hand, had counseled her through impossible decisions, had held her kingdom together when grief threatened to tear it apart. And all that time, he'd been planning her murder. "Your Majesty." Aldwin's voice carried perfectly through the cavernous space, rich with what sounded like genuine emotion. Relief, joy, gratitude, all of it perfectly performed, perfectly false. God be praised. "You live. When word reached us of the attack, when we found the carriage and feared the worst," he descended the throne steps with measured dignity, arms outstretched in welcome. "We have been in mourning, preparing for the unthinkable, but you've returned to us. You've survived." Mira watched him approach, watched the crowd part before him, and felt Stefan's presence at her shoulder like a promise of violence barely restrained. She'd left Marcus and his accomplices with the city guard at the gates, along with orders that they be held for immediate trial. Word would have reached Aldwin within minutes. He knew she had his hired killers in custody. He knew his conspiracy was exposed. And yet he was walking toward her with open arms and a smile that could have melted stone. "Lord Chancellor." Mira's voice cut through the hall like a blade, stopping him mid-stride. "You seem surprised to see me. Tell me, were you expecting someone else to walk through those doors?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Aldwin's smile never wavered, but Mira saw something flicker in his eyes. Calculation, assessment, the rapid weighing of options that came from a lifetime of political maneuvering. "I'm surprised only by the miracle of your survival, Your Majesty. The wreckage we found suggested no one could have escaped alive." He gestured toward her dress, still torn and blood-stained despite their attempts to clean it. "Your injuries must have been severe. We should summon the royal physicians immediately." "I've already been treated." Mira took 3 steps forward, each one deliberate, each one carrying the weight of accusation. By a mountain healer who asked no questions and demanded no explanations. Unlike some, he had no interest in whether I lived or died beyond basic human decency. The crowd stirred, a ripple of confusion and growing tension spreading through the assembled nobles. They could feel it now, the wrongness beneath the surface, the way this reunion should have been joyful but instead felt like the moment before an execution. "Your Majesty, I don't understand," Aldwin began, but Mira cut him off with a raised hand that demanded silence and received it instantly. 3 men are in custody at the city gates. Marcus Thorne and 2 accomplices. They've confessed to sabotaging my carriage, to murdering my escort, to attempting to assassinate their queen. Mira let each word fall like a stone into still water, watching the ripples spread. And they've named you, Lord Chancellor Aldwin, as the man who hired them. The hall erupted, shouting, gasps of shock, the metallic ring of swords being drawn by guards who didn't know which side to defend. Through it all, Aldwin stood perfectly still, his face a mask of wounded dignity and righteous indignation. "These are lies," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. "Desperate fabrications by captured criminals trying to save their own necks. Your Majesty, I have served this crown faithfully for 6 years. I have given everything to whom?" Mira's voice cracked like a whip. "To my kingdom? Or to King Aldrich of Valdoria, who offered you what? Gold, land, a position of power in the new regime after you sold my throne to him?" She was guessing now, but the way Aldwin's jaw tightened told her she'd struck close to the truth. Stefan had spent the journey coaching her on court politics, on the likely motivations for conspiracy, and they'd constructed a theory that felt sickeningly plausible. Aldwin wanted power. King Aldrich wanted territory. And Elena, with her refusal to marry and her fierce independence, had stood in the way of both their ambitions. "This is madness." Aldwin turned to address the crowd, playing to them now, using his decades of political capital to sway opinion. "She returns after days in the wilderness, traumatized, injured, and she accuses me, of treason based on the word of hired killers. My lords, my ladies, look at her. Look at the state she's in. Can we trust the judgment of someone who's clearly been through such an ordeal?" It was brilliant. Mira felt the crowd beginning to shift, saw doubt creeping into faces that had been sympathetic moments before. Aldwin was planting the seed of uncertainty, suggesting without quite saying that perhaps she wasn't entirely in her right mind, that perhaps the trauma had unhinged her, that perhaps she wasn't quite herself. And in that moment, Mira realized with crystal clarity what she had to do, what Elena would have done if she'd lived. "You're right," she said quietly, and the unexpected agreement made Aldwin pause mid-breath. "I'm not quite myself. How could I be after watching my dearest companion die in my arms? After seeing Mira, who served me faithfully for 12 years, give her life to save mine?" The throne room went absolutely silent. Mira felt Stefan's hand grip her shoulder, felt his tension like electricity, but she kept her eyes locked on Aldwin's face. Watched understanding begin to dawn there, watched horror creep in behind his careful mask. "Mira threw herself over me when the carriage went over." Mira continued, her voice breaking now with genuine grief. "She took the worst of the impact. She died so that I might live, and with her last breath she told me something. She took a step closer to Aldwin, close enough to see the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. She told me about the conversation she overheard 3 weeks ago. The one between you and King Aldrich's ambassador. The one where you promised to deliver my kingdom in exchange for the governorship of the southern provinces. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but it was detailed enough, specific enough, delivered with such absolute conviction that Mira saw belief taking root in the crowd, saw nobles beginning to look at Aldwin with new eyes, with suspicion replacing trust. I never... Aldwin was stammering now, his composure cracking. "Your Majesty, please, you must believe me. I would never..." "Search his chambers." Mira's voice rang with command. "Search his private study. You'll find correspondence with Valdoria. You'll find evidence of every piece of treason I've accused him of." Because Mira didn't just overhear that conversation. She documented it. She kept records, like the careful, loyal servant she was. The guards were moving now, half of them toward Aldwin, half toward the doors to carry out her orders. Aldwin backed away, his hand moving toward his sword, and Mira saw the moment when he made his decision, the moment when he chose violence over capture. "Stop." His voice was thunder, backed by genuine authority. "I am Lord Chancellor of this realm. I've served faithfully while she—" He pointed at Mira with a trembling finger. "She is an impostor, a fraud. The queen died in that carriage, and this woman, whoever she is using her death to seize power." The accusation hung in the air, devastating in its simplicity. Because it was true. Mira wasn't Elena. She was exactly the fraud Aldwin accused her of being. And if anyone looked too closely, if anyone questioned too hard, the whole edifice would collapse. But Mira had spent 2 weeks learning to be a queen, had spent every moment since the crash building this performance. And she knew, with the certainty that had convinced Marcus Thorne to kneel, that the only way to survive this was to believe her own lie so completely that doubt became impossible. "Then prove it," she said softly, dangerously. "If I'm a fraud, expose me, ask me anything, test my knowledge, question my memories. But do it in front of the entire court, Lord Chancellor. Let everyone see who's telling the truth and who's desperate to avoid the headsman's axe." Aldwin's face had gone gray. He was trapped, and he knew it. If he questioned her publicly and she answered correctly, his accusations would seem like desperate deflection. If he refused to question her, he would appear guilty, and if he tried to escape, he would prove his guilt beyond any doubt. "The scar," he said suddenly, grasping at straws. "Queen Elena had a scar on her left shoulder. A riding accident when she was 15. Show us your shoulder. Prove you're her." Mira's heart stopped. She had no such scar. She'd never fallen from a horse, never suffered any injury that would mark her in that particular way. This was it. This was the moment where everything ended. But Stefan was already moving, his voice cutting through her panic. "How dare you demand the queen disrobe in front of the court? What kind of depravity is this?" "I'm not asking her to disrobe," Aldwin snapped. "Just to show—" "The scar healed," Mira said, and was amazed by how steady her voice came out. "The mountain healer who treated me, he had medicines, salves made from herbs that don't grow in the lowlands. The wounds from the crash, the burns, even old scars, they healed without trace." She met Aldwin's eyes and saw his desperation mirrored there. "You'd know that if you'd ever ventured beyond the palace walls, Lord Chancellor, if you'd ever cared about anything beyond your own ambition." It was absurd, impossible. No medicine could erase old scars. But the crowd wanted to believe her, needed to believe her, because the alternative was chaos, was admitting their Lord Chancellor had murdered their queen, was facing the reality that their kingdom had been ruled by a conspiracy. "She's lying," Aldwin whispered, but the words had no strength behind them. "She's lying, and you're all fools if you believe." The door to the throne room burst open, and a guard rushed in, breathless, carrying a wooden box. "Your Majesty, in the Lord Chancellor's chambers, we found—" He opened the box, revealing stacks of correspondence sealed with the Valdorian royal crest. Letters, dozens of them. Plans for the invasion. Payment records for Marcus Thorne. Everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room fixed on Aldwin watched his face cycle through denial, rage, and finally desperate calculation. Then he was moving, faster than anyone expected, his sword clearing its sheath as he lunged toward Mira with the single-minded purpose of a man who had nothing left to lose. Stefan intercepted him before Mira could even flinch, his blade meeting Aldwin's with a screech of metal that seemed to echo forever. They fought there, in the center of the throne room, two men locked in a battle that represented everything this moment meant. Betrayal versus loyalty, ambition versus honor, lies versus truth. It lasted 8 seconds. Stefan was younger, harder, forged by loss and survival rather than soft court living. Aldwin's sword clattered to the floor and Stefan's blade pressed against his throat, drawing a thin line of blood. "Yield," Stefan growled. "Yield or die." Aldwin looked past Stefan to Mira, and in his eyes she saw something that made her blood run cold. Not defeat. Recognition. He knew. In that moment he knew exactly what she was, and his lips curved into a smile that had nothing to do with humor. "Long live the queen," he whispered. "Whoever she is." Then Stefan's blade moved, and Aldwin's words dissolved into choking silence. The Lord Chancellor of the realm collapsed to the marble floor, his blood spreading in a pool that reflected the throne room's chandeliers like a dark mirror. Mira stared at the body, at the end of the man who'd murdered her queen, and felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just a hollow certainty that this was only the beginning, that ruling Elena's kingdom would be harder than claiming it, that every day for the rest of her life she would wake up wearing a dead woman's face and carrying a dead woman's crown. But she would do it, because Elena had died trying to save her people, and Mira would finish what her queen had started, even if it meant losing herself completely in the process. Your Majesty, the master of, Ceremony's voice trembled as he approached, falling to his knees before her. What are your orders? Mira looked at him, at the court, at the kingdom that now rested on her shoulders, looked at Stefan, who met her eyes with understanding that went beyond words. Then she climbed the steps to Elena's throne and sat, feeling the weight of it settle onto her like destiny or doom or both at once. Send word to King Aldrich, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. Tell him the wedding is off. Tell him that if he wishes war, he'll find this queen far more formidable than he imagined. And tell him that I know everything about his conspiracy with my late Lord Chancellor. Everything. As the court erupted into frantic activity, as nobles rushed to pledge their loyalty and guards dragged Aldwin's body away, Mira sat perfectly still on Elena's throne and let the truth settle over her like a shroud. She had won. She had survived. She was queen, and she would never be Mira again. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't standing up for who you are, but becoming someone else entirely to honor what they died fighting for. Mira didn't just steal a crown that day in the throne room. She buried herself alive, sacrificed every truth she'd ever known, and chose to carry the weight of an entire kingdom on shoulders that were never meant to bear it. And Stefan, a man who'd lost everything and sworn never to care again, found redemption not in saving his own family, but in protecting a stranger's impossible dream. Their story forces us to ask ourselves the hardest question of all. What would you sacrifice to stop evil from winning? Your name? Your past? Your very identity? Would you have the strength to become a lie so complete that even you start to forget where the performance ends and the truth begins? In the end, this isn't just a story about deception or survival. It's about the price we pay when we choose to fight instead of flee, when we decide that some causes are worth dying for, or worse, worth living for, in ways that kill who we used to be. Mira sits on that throne every day, wearing a dead woman's face, speaking with a dead woman's voice, and she does it because sometimes love isn't about holding on to the people we cherish. Sometimes it's about finishing what they started, even when the cost is everything we are. If this story moved you, if it made you question what you'd do in Mira's place, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. Because in a world that often feels too dark to change, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to become someone else entirely, just to make sure the light doesn't go out forever.